Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show, your source for market intel, forecasts, and strategies. Hello, I am Michael Bull, and I appreciate you being with us today. This show is brought to you by CREI Summit. This is a great summit. This year it's going to be in Atlanta, and it is September 11th through September 13th. And I'm going to give you a discount code if you'd like to come. And who should come? Anyone in commercial real estate, right? If you're a developer, you're developing properties, you can learn a lot about influencers and about social media and about podcasts and about LinkedIn and all these things that can help you in your business. So if you're a broker, you develop properties, or you're just looking to up your game, it's also very fun and very cool people. I'll give you the website and the discount code. The website is CREISummit.com, and the discount code is MichaelBull10. MichaelBull10, you'll get 10% off. So please come see us. I'll be there. Say hello. All right, let's get with the show today. We got an interesting show today. We've never done a show on this topic. We're going to talk about data centers. Look, with everything going to the cloud, right? Everything has to be in the cloud. And now we have AI and the demand there. So that's creating a lot of demand for these data centers. But what's it really about? How big is this sector? You know, what's going on with cap rates and development? What kind of land and what kind of resources do you need? Let's find out. Please welcome my guest. It's Ermengarde Jabir. She's senior economist with Moody's Analytics. Thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me again, Michael, to speak on my new favorite topic, data centers.
Yeah. So how big is this sector? I mean, we've not covered it, I guess, in the past, thinking, you know, it was kind of small, but how big is this sector now?
Yeah, historically it was comparatively small, relatively niche. It required a lot of institutional knowledge in order to really be able to bring a data center online to life. It's exploded in size in recent years, and really now with the advent of Gen AI, it's set to explode even further. And really, the growth that we've seen over the past year alone really does relate quite directly to expansion in Gen AI. And you know, it's odd to say that traditional AI, because, you know, if we think back to you know, sort of Alan Turing's foundational paper on artificial intelligence, and, you know, in the early 1950s, it wasn't that long ago, but now we have the traditional AI space that doesn't require as much power, as much storage. But with Gen AI, the amount of power and storage required is, you know, easily 10x.
Yeah. And is this growth going to stop? Is this going to explode? What do you expect moving forward?
So all exponential growth eventually slows. You know, we saw that certainly in the industrial sector recently. So you know, unfortunately, exponential growth is not sustainable over the long term. So eventually it will slow, but we still very much are in the exponential growth phase for data centers in terms of needing more space, more physical space, more land, more power, more water for cooling, just to continue feeding all of the Gen AI applications that are now coming online.
And so our listeners understand, what's the typical size of these buildings, and are they typically new construction or existing buildings being converted?
So there's a wide range of data centers. So typically, if you think of a co-location data center where a company rents a little bit of space out of a data center, and the data center has multiple tenants, for example, they tend to have smaller power draws. So data centers aren't usually quantified like the rest of commercial real estate in square feet. They're more quantified in terms of kilowatts or megawatts of power supplied. And so if we think about a co-location data center, it can, you know, provide a few kilowatts, 30, 40 kilowatts of power. But really, the Gen AI operations are centered around hyperscale. And so hyperscale facilities usually have megawatts and megawatts of power. So it can be anywhere from a few megawatts to tens to 100 plus megawatts. And if we think about what a megawatt is. A megawatt is the equivalent of about 750 to about 1,000 households power consumption for a year. So it really is a lot of power. And the hyperscale facilities typically run these larger operations. So think about AWS or Facebook, Meta, and so on and so forth. Google, of course, Alphabet. So usually they're single tenant and leased to these mega corporations that are running extremely large, powerful models.
How hard is it to find locations with that much power?
Well, it is difficult, and it's growing increasingly difficult. And I think there's a relatively telling aspect to the sector that is proving how difficult it is. And that's the fact that previously, before leasing a space, companies would always make sure that the infrastructure feeding a data center was absolutely top notch, top of the line, because the worst thing that can possibly happen in a data center is that the power goes out. Companies are always searching for the best in terms of power service, infrastructure, and all of that. What we're seeing more recently is because there is such a dearth of supply, companies are leasing space, pre-leasing space in properties that maybe don't have the high level of infrastructure that they need at this very moment, but they know that the infrastructure will eventually catch up. So they're basically trying to make sure that they secure space, even if it's not necessarily space with the fastest, best connectivity.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you see for cap rate trends in this space?
So cap rates for data centers are extremely competitive. They're relatively on par with more recent industrial cap rates, which isn't really surprising because if we think about data centers for a long time, they were viewed sort of as part of a subsector under the larger industrial umbrella. Now they're standing more on their own just because the size of the sector and the advancements in technology have really separated it out. But surprisingly, cap rates for data centers are sort of on par now with multifamily. And multifamily has traditionally had the lowest cap rates across at least the core four, certainly. So, they're very much, they're higher than they were before. So before interest rate increases in 2022, they were in the 4 to 6% range, more or less. Now they're a bit higher, more in the 5.5% to 7.5% range. But that's to be expected because really no asset class has been immune to interest rate increases because everybody needs to build in a risk premium into the, on top of the risk-free rate, no matter how small the risk premium may be. Having said all of that, data centers have really maintained their value spectacularly, over this time. And they've also appreciated in value. And they're really one of the they're really the only sector where they've experienced value appreciation across the board over this time period.
So I imagine the cost to build these and build them out is pretty expensive.
Oh, it's very expensive. So the physical structure itself is not that expensive. It's sort of in the vein of, again, industrial, more or less a concrete box. But the expense really comes in the interior build out. And so what we're seeing now in the lending landscape is because generally CRE loans have higher interest rates than C&I loans, that there's now a split in lending, essentially. So the land acquisition, the physical building of the property, the built structure, rather, that is now falling under a CRE loan. And the interior built out with the racks, the servers, the cooling equipment, all of that is now being financed at slightly lower interest rates with C&I loans. But, beyond that, if we think about whether we need to acquire new land for data centers and build new properties, or really, convert, redevelop, there is quite a bit of conversion activity in the office to data center space where, old office buildings, if they were built well, so, typically, central business district, older buildings, they usually have sufficiently load bearing floors to be able to put data centers inside. But if we think about suburban offices, those old office parks are now actually, not all of them, but some of them, the obsolete ones, are being raised to make way for data center construction.
So I imagine with the cost to build these and build them out, interior would create the need for really long-term leases.
Yes. So there are long-term leases in place. There's certainly the need for stability in the data center landscape. So tenants want to make sure that they will have access to the servers, the networks, the power for a really long time. And there are cases in which tenants actually build out the data centers themselves. So usually, if it's more proprietary information, more sensitive information, tenants in many cases will build out the data centers themselves, the interior.
Interesting. What else would our listeners like to find interesting about these data centers? It's such a new sector to a lot of us.
Yeah, I think really thinking about location choice in terms of the natural resources that data centers require is just a really important point to touch on. So obviously we need land on which to build the data centers, but beyond that, the two main factors that a data center needs in order to run, of course, beyond the interior technology, are a source of power and a source of cooling. And typically, the source of power has been drawn from the main grid, but as the demand for data centers explodes, the need for additional power becomes more pressing. And so what we are seeing is data centers trying to source their power from alternative sources of power. So whether it's solar or nuclear power, we've actually seen recent cases of purchases of land or data centers, land for data centers rather, being made close to independent power sources, nuclear power plants essentially, just to be able to supply enough power while being off grid in terms of not being dependent on the main power infrastructure. And then, of course, cooling is another issue. So if we think about traditional cooling for data centers, it's typically water-based cooling, so air conditioning essentially. But as the amount of power supplied to data centers increases, and as the amount of power to any one given data center increases, what we do see is that the advances in cooling technology have really sped up. So there's now a move towards liquid cooling. So Freon essentially, but not Freon, safer alternatives, because Freon is obviously not in use anymore, but essentially either submerging the racks, the servers in the liquid cooling, or putting the liquid cooling at the back of each piece of technology in order to cool without having to pull from natural resources. And essentially that allows for a wider selection of location choice in terms of land for constructing data centers. Sort of an interesting anecdote, or at least interesting to me, is that there are a lot of data centers in Scandinavia and the Nordic countries, and a lot of that is because they're able to depend on cooler ambient temperatures to to cool the data centers without actually having to, again, draw on a water supply or anything else for cooling.
That's interesting. So might my cloud-based computing be in another country then?
It could very well be, yes. I mean, so if we think about Northern Virginia, uh, also known as Data Center Alley, it is the largest data center market in the world, and it's even exploded in recent times. So if we think about uh, growth over 2023, it had about 3,000 megawatts of power supplied. Now it has about 4,500 megawatts of power supplied, and another several thousand in the pipeline. So it's really exploding. But if we think about, uh, you know, global capitals of data centers, so certainly Northern Virginia, far and away number one across the board. It's unlikely to lose its first mover advantage. But if we think about Beijing, London, Frankfurt, Paris, they all supply a tremendous amount of power for data centers. As everyone around the world is really firmly rooted in their, again, traditional, odd to say, but, their traditional computing needs. And on top of that, the exploding growth in Gen AI applications.
So location, is it geographically is as important as it is just finding the resources and the power, because you can have a data center supplying people all over the world, right?
Yes, exactly. So previously, it used to be really important to have a data center that was close to a business center, essentially. So you would want data centers in close proximity to New York, for example, for the bankers to make trades that were very much time dependent, related to arbitrage opportunities, for example, and all of that. But now with advances in technology, while that still is important, a lot of these other applications that, maybe don't necessarily require speed, because, milliseconds and nanoseconds count, are able to be located in more remote places. Oregon, for example, the Portland area has really exploded as a data center hub. Phoenix, again, these aren't exactly remote places, but I mean, farther away from main business centers. So they're not in Chicago, in New York, in Los Angeles necessarily. Phoenix is another place. Phoenix is actually a very interesting story because so if we think back to the early 2000s, a lot of land was purchased in Phoenix for home building purposes. And so we all know the story there, but 2008 rolled around. Home builders were no longer building these master plan communities at the same speed or level quantity. And so what they eventually did was they had all this land that they didn't have use for in its original for its original intention anymore. And so what ended up happening is, because they were able to acquire that land, quote unquote, relatively cheap, eventually, as data centers started to grow in popularity and in demand, really through the 2010s, they started building data centers. And that's why Phoenix has so many data centers. It's, one of the largest I think it's the second or third largest in the country in terms of power supplied, yet it's in a very hot climate and it doesn't have great access to water. But because the land wasn't expensive, developers acquired the land, cheaply, 20 plus years ago now. They were able to repurpose and build data centers.
Yeah, and there's plenty of land out there. During the Great Recession, we picked up an assignment to sell 4,700 acres outside of Phoenix, and it was $100 million loan that went bust that involved 60 banks. So it was an interesting assignment. But it's in building them there in that type of heat and lack of water must be pretty costly to try to cool and power that.
It is costly, and data center operations are very expensive, just because, again, if you think about the two basic resources that they cannot function without, power, and so energy, a source of energy, a source of electricity, and water. They are very expensive to run, and that's why there have been so many advances in the past 6 months, really, in liquid cooling for data centers, because people are viewing that as a short-term cost that will eventually lead to lower operating expenses in the long term.
So I guess the prices per square foot of these properties when they sell is quite high then.
Yes, very high, because they're very valuable properties. And, on top of that, they've done a remarkable job of maintaining their value. They're no asset is immune to macroeconomic shocks. I certainly don't want to say that. But, looking across the board in terms of commercial real estate, the demand, the fact that data centers literally cannot be built fast enough to compensate for demand, means that their value in the near term and the medium term, and even in the long term, as they continue to draw more power and access to certainly main grid infrastructure becomes more limited, will continue to hold tremendous value.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we have probably about 33,000 people listening to this. And I don't know how many people watch this show. I don't remember the numbers. But if you are listening and you want to watch, we'll have some pictures of these data centers. We'll also throw up some sales comps so you can see that. And Ermengarde, thank you for this information. It's a really interesting topic. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Michael.
All right. And thank you for joining us around the country. Hey, do me a favor. Please share the show with others. Hey, I put it out there for free for you guys. So please pay it forward to other folks. Share it on your LinkedIn, your social media, your email, any way you can do it. We appreciate it. Hey, and if you want anything from us, if we can help you in any way, reach out to me. My email is an easy one. It's michael@bullrealty.com. Until next week, be sure that you always lead, learn, and laugh, and join us for America's Commercial Real Estate Show. America's Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you by CCIM C5 Summit. We'll be at the Hard Rock Hotel in Hollywood, Florida, September 17th to 19th. Visit c5summit.realestate. By CREI Summit. This will be in Atlanta, Georgia, September 11th to the 13th, right here in Atlanta, Georgia, where we're headquartered. Visit cresummit.com. By Bull Realty, commercial real estate sales, leasing, and advisory services. Visit bullrealty.com or reach out to me directly. My email is michael@bullrealty.com. By Commercial Agent Success Strategies, 21 cloud-accessed agent training videos. Learn more at commercialagentsuccess.com. You're invited to subscribe to the show wherever you listen or watch the show. You're also invited to subscribe to a weekly email announcing the show topic and guests at creshow.com. Thank you for watching, listening, and sharing America's Commercial Real Estate Show.